How is it that China, a totalitarian communist regime, is able to censor the NBA? This is a question we're going to answer in this segment, so stick around. We're trying something new today. Of course, I'm Joshua Philipp, host of Crossroads. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. We really appreciate your support. Of course, it means a lot to us. It's how we grow, right? But today we're trying something new. It's a unscripted kind of answering questions we see people might have out there when it comes to what's happening in China, what's happening with psychological warfare, socialism, subversion, any of the big topics we focus on here. Everyone, let us know what you think of this format. Let us know what you think of this style. Maybe we'll do it as a live video in the future. I mean, if you think this is great, let me know. If you want live, let me know. Leave it in the comments. Today we're going to be talking about something I'm sure you've all seen, which is the NBA folding to Chinese pressure on censorship. Of course, they've done the same thing now to Blizzard, the gaming company. Now, of course, when you hear about big companies getting censored by China, one of the questions is immediately, what does this have to do with me? So let's go into it. Now, we can start, we go back a little further to when the U.S. was first opening trade to China. Of course, Nixon went to China, had his whole divide the Sino-Soviet pact, right? The Chinese Communist Party and the Russians were not getting along during that time. Long story short, there was the Amur Valley conflict. Russia and China were having, real troop-on-troop conflicts, fighting each other. The U.S. they knew that, militarily during the Cold War, of course, they knew we could defeat Russia. We could defeat China. Of course, if it went to nuclear war, it's another story. But militarily, normal war, we could defeat one or the other. Both would have been a different story. So Nixon goes to China, makes this big deal, puts on this big show of bringing them into, opening trade up with China and these types of things. Soviet Union's very unhappy about it. It helps divide them. We're left with this new state, though, where we're trading with a totalitarian communist regime, which is a very controversial thing, especially during the Cold War, let alone today. But the hope was that by opening up trade with China, maybe they'll become more democratic. Maybe they'll become more free. This went a bit further under many presidents. I think the next big one was under George Bush. Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton had went of course to the Chinese Communist Party and brought him into the World Trade Organization. When he did that, brought him into the WTO, again, it was this idea that, they're a communist country. Obviously, communism is against capitalism. If you bring capitalism to the country, maybe communism will go away. It's a very shallow understanding of communism, though. Communism is not just the, destruction of the, capitalist system or the taking over the, the economy of a country. It's a lot deeper. I think all you who've been following this show understand that. So I won't go too into it here. But long story short, they learned the hard way. The Chinese Communist Party did not become more democratic. They did not become more free. They did have a bit of the, opening up a bit and bringing in some basic forms of capitalism. But the totalitarian socialist controls of the country did not end. They became more intense. They have things right now like the social credit system where they monitor every single Chinese person. They keep databases on every single Chinese person. And their connections, their family members, their opinions, their online purchases, all of these things are used to create a citizen score for them. And that citizen score determines their freedom or their oppression in that society. We have the persecution of the Uyghurs. We hear about these concentration camps. You have organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. You have the destruction of Christian churches. The totalitarian nature of the Chinese Communist Party has not changed one drop. All that we have is a very polished veneer, this very deceptive, smiling image of this new and rising China that's shown to us by all of our trustworthy media right, these days. And that all these big corporations like to prop up in front of us and say, look, see, we're trading with them and we're helping China become more open and more free. And, so what? We abide by China's laws. We abide by China's laws. What does that mean? Well, that means things like what we just saw with the NBA. China's laws are things that, for example, ban certain types of speech. You cannot criticize the Communist Party if you're playing their games. It's the same thing they do to Hollywood. If you want to read something interesting, check out some of the requirements they put on Hollywood films. Things like portraying the United States in a positive light can get your film blocked in China. Portraying the U.S. military in a positive light can get your film blocked in China. And if you want to get into the Chinese market, you need to film, a scene in China. You need to have a Chinese actor. You need to work with them. Sometimes Hollywood films even work, they even co-produce the films with these Chinese studios. You're being fed Chinese propaganda for the sake of business. And that brings us to what we see now with the NBA. And look, because of these business ties, because we've let them into our systems, these companies and the people under them cannot criticize the Chinese Communist Party. When they see human rights abuses, and when they see people standing up against it, when they see people crying out for freedom, like we see in Hong Kong right now, willing to stand up and face potential death. People are warning about a repeat of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Standing up against that, these companies, people under these companies, they cannot stand up against it. They cannot speak out against it because of these business ties. And so the Chinese Communist Party is able to extend its censorship onto American citizens. It's able to restrict your speech. It's able to tell you what you can and can't say. It's able to say, you are not allowed to oppose this totalitarian regime that is persecuting its own citizens, and you are not allowed to stand by the people who are opposing that. Now think about this. Well, when we get into why the Chinese Communist Party does this, I think we should start by the importance they put on information warfare. We can look at the three warfares doctrine, which is adopted into their military code. Now, I think for a lot of Americans, this sounds maybe not far-fetched. I think we know propaganda warfare exists. We saw World War II, Cold War. Heck, we can look at so our mainstream media friends these days. You want to see some propaganda, right? Am I right? But with the Chinese Communist Party, this is a major focus. So what is the three warfares doctrine? It is adopted into their military strategy. And the three warfares are media warfare, psychological warfare, and legal warfare. And what are these? Media warfare is the control, censorship, whatever, of all outlets of information, not just news outlets. It's the control of things like social media platforms, the control of things like the internet itself, like we see with the Golden Shield. It's the control of, of course, news outlets, blogs. They have the 50-cent army, guys, guys and girls, I guess, they pay to go around and leave pro-Chinese Communist Party comments or attack people who say something that goes against Communist Party doctrine all over the internet. They pay them, they say, call them the 50-cent army. They give them, pennies on the dollar to go leave these comments for every post. When we get into psychological warfare, this is an interesting concept. Now, usually when we think of disinformation, propaganda, these kinds of things, we think false information. We think things meant to spread false information, disinformation, these kinds of things. It is not always the case. That's not always how this stuff works. And not even with disinformation, in fact, that's not always how it works. Disinformation, psychological warfare, can be the changing of the conclusion of accurate information. Psychological warfare is specifically altering the way you perceive an issue. It is the attack on your perception, not necessarily twisting the information itself, although it could include that. And then legal warfare is the manipulation of legal systems. It could be US law, it could be China law, it could be international law. So, for example, the Chinese Communist Party, they have a saying, strangle you with your own systems. Think about that. Strangle you with your own systems. They have people who study our laws. They study our culture, and they find loopholes. They find soft points that they can manipulate strategically. the three warfares concept works through this. Now, and just as a real-world example of how that plays out, let's look at the South China Sea. How did the Chinese Communist Party roll in, say that they owned the place, build these islands, and put military infrastructure on these islands, and then try to police people who want to pass through the region, right? Well, here's what they did. They falsified documents saying they have historical ownership of that region. They held it up in the court system, legal warfare, right? They held it up in the court system, legal warfare. That's legal warfare. They were eventually found to have not have historical ownership as they claimed to have. And of course, the claim that they had historical ownership was the psychological warfare element. But we'll get deeper into that. They held it up in the legal system. Eventually, the international courts found that China was wrong. They do not have historical ownership of the region, but they said, oh, well, Chinese law says we have historical ownership. That's our law. You have your law. Respect our law. We'll do what we want, right? That's legal warfare. Now, when I got into psychological warfare, this is how they held up the debate. They kept it from entering the military or diplomatic phase by locking it in the court system. Then they had all their agents go abroad, and it's so easy to manipulate foreign media that it's disgusting. All you got to do if you're a Chinese Communist Party member and you want to manipulate a foreign news outlet is send your little buddy over here who's a former Chinese diplomat or former official and have him go to any Western news outlet and say, what you wrote about is offensive to the Chinese people. How dare you be so racist to the Chinese people? You are offending me. Let me tell you the real story, because Chinese people, this is what they think, and you're being an insensitive American who doesn't understand China. That journalist will fall to his knees, crawl up to him, and report anything he says. Simple as that. And that's exactly what they did with the South China Sea. Although, of course, it turned around a little bit. You look at some of the mainstream press, the reporting was pretty terrible. But the fact is, a lot of them, even if they know it's nonsense, even if they know that everything they're reporting is false, a lot of times they'll still give equal voice to these agents, to the Chinese Communist Party's information warfare, experts. They'll give equal weight to them. They'll let them say what they want to say. So, and then sometimes they'll even publish op-eds from, foreign, overseas, say, visiting professors and these types of things, people who are very much a part of that system, but who are allowed to publish their statements in Western media. And then, of course, we get into psychological warfare, media warfare. We covered it. So let's go now to NBA, right? What are we seeing now? We are seeing the effects of what happens when a company has a multi-billion-dollar business tie with the Chinese Communist Party, and they become unwilling to respect human rights because of that, right? Now, these are the guys who spoke their wokeness for years now. These are the guys who claimed, that you sacrifice everything, right? Just do it, right? Even if it means cost. I can't remember the phrase, but it's a bunch of nonsense, and we're seeing that now. Yeah, the money comes before, true respect for human rights. Money comes before respect for people standing up against tyranny. This is what we're seeing now. And this is also, I think, a clear sign of what the U.S. needs to be careful of when it's dealing with Chinese censorship, when it's dealing with allowing big corporations to do business with China. Because as soon as they do that, they open up the door where the Chinese Communist Party can threaten to cut off all of that money. They can threaten to hurt their shares, their corporate interests, for the sake of upholding the Chinese Communist Party's, overseas agenda. And this ties, of course, into the broader picture of subversion. This ties into the broader picture of how the Chinese Communist Party presses its influence into other countries, what they call soft power. I won't get into the whole picture of this today, but this ties into not just three warfare's doctrine, but to the entire system of what they call unrestricted warfare. Culture warfare, drug warfare, media warfare, psychological warfare, business warfare, economic warfare, which are different. Business warfare is like companies, economic warfare is things that impact GDP. Political warfare, China had before the General Political Department, focused on waging political warfare against other countries. A whole militarized department focused on political warfare, waging war on foreign politics. Think about that. We heard all this noise about Russian interference. China has a known public department focused on that, and nobody's talking about it. Think about that. Anyways, thanks for sticking around. I think there's a lot of interesting discussions to be had still, a lot we can go into on this. I'm having to restrain myself. Sometimes I do public speaking events, I can talk for hours. I have to restrain myself. But, things I want to go into the future, I really want to go into drug warfare, really want to go into the whole system of psychological warfare, because it's, in my opinion, one of the biggest issues in our world today. Not just the general topic, but how it's done, how media manipulates perception, how governments manipulate perception, how politics and different special interest groups work together on these things. And I really want to get into this with all of you. But yeah, let me know what you think of this segment. You think I'm full of hot air? Think it's a bunch of nonsense? Tell me. I appreciate the feedback. If you like it, let me know also. If there's a topic you're interested in, me talking about or us researching or going into, let me know in the comments also. And everyone, please again remember to like and subscribe. We really appreciate your support. See you next time.